I knew something in my life had shattered the moment I heard the pounding, violent, frantic against my front door. I stood frozen while the people I had once trusted most screamed my name as if I were an intruder in my own home. In that instant, I felt every crack that betrayal had carved into me, every moment of manipulation, dismissal, and quiet cruelty converging into one truth. Sometimes the deepest wounds are delivered by the hands you once held with love. And when the door finally swung open, what they saw drained every trace of confidence from their faces. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Caldwell, though most people in Provincetown call me Maggie, the way my late husband, Thomas, always did. At 69, I live alone in the cedar-shingled house he and I bought nearly 4 decades ago, tucked along Carpenter's Lane, where the salt air clings to every porch rail. Most mornings begin the same way, a mug of hot black tea warming my hands, the window above the kitchen sink cracked open so I can hear the gulls circling over the harbor. The rhythm of this town has always soothed me, but since Thomas passed 8 years ago, the quiet sometimes presses in too closely, as if the house itself holds its breath with me. The place is a museum of our life together. The floors still creak where he used to pace while waiting for a photo to develop. His battered camera bag sits on the second shelf of the hallway closet. The Japanese tea set he brought back from a conference in Seattle gleams behind glass. Beside it rests a stack of vinyl records, mostly jazz, the same ones we played during long winter storms when the world shrank to the glow of our fireplace. My studio, set up near the back windows, holds jars of brushes and pastel sticks, each coated with a fine dusting of blues and greens from years of sketching the Atlantic. My days are quiet but full. I teach an informal art class twice a week at the town library, mostly to retirees who want a reason to leave the house. Beyond that, my circle is small. Lydia Turner, a nurse who retired too early but still walks faster than any of us, and Samuel Hayes, a longtime friend of Thomas who practiced law before choosing a slower life by the ocean. They check on me more often than I admit I need. That steady, predictable life shifted when my son Daniel called. I had not heard his voice that tense in years. At 45, he had drifted from one job to another, always promising he was on the verge of stability. The pandemic hit him harder than he let on, and the job he took in Boston had evaporated. "Mom, we need a place to stay for a little while," he said, and my heart responded before my mind could. Of course they could stay. He was my boy, even if the edges of our relationship had frayed with time. Elena, his wife, arrived with him, along with their 2 children, Emma and Lucas. The house, once too quiet, suddenly pulsed with life. I heard the thud of sneakers on the stairs, the hum of animated shows from the living room, the clatter of Elena's laptop keys as she worked on her marketing projects. Elena was polished, quick, and impossibly modern, the kind of woman who seemed to live half inside her phone. She smiled politely, though now and then I caught an expression on her face that suggested she was cataloging my house the way an appraiser might. Still, the first evenings felt warm. We crowded around my small dining table, passing bowls of stew while Daniel talked about job applications and Elena described social media trends I barely understood. Watching Emma and Lucas chase each other down the hallway, I felt something I had not felt in years, a sense of family filling the empty corners. That night, after everyone went to bed, I lingered in the kitchen and looked out toward the faint outline of Race Point Lighthouse. A mist had rolled in, swallowing most of the view. I told myself it was only the weather, but something about the blurred horizon unsettled me. I brushed the thought aside. My family was home, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt alive again. If you're still watching and this opening pulled you in, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. Things are about to shift in ways no one sees coming. I first noticed the change the afternoon I came home from my art class, still smelling of charcoal and lavender soap. Sunlight poured through the living room in a way that felt wrong, sharper and colder than it had ever been. It took me a moment to realize why. The embroidered curtains I had stitched in my 40s, the ones Thomas always said made the room feel like a warm pocket of sunlight, were gone. In their place hung thin gray panels that looked like something from a catalog. I stood there, holding my tote bag, trying to convince myself that maybe they were only being washed, but the rod still held the price tag string and my stomach tightened. On the mantel, where our wedding photo had rested for decades, I found a plastic vase of artificial tulips. The photo had vanished, leaving behind a faint rectangular outline where the dust had not settled. I opened the drawer where I kept Thomas's old film rolls, only to find several boxes empty. Elena, passing through the hallway, offered a breezy explanation about tidying visual clutter to make the space more modern. Her voice stayed polite, but something about the way she glanced around the room felt like she was assessing it, not appreciating it. Later that evening, Elena floated the idea of a little update to the house. She mentioned converting the spare bedroom into a workspace for herself and renting out the other room on a short-term basis to help the whole family. Daniel nodded immediately, talking about online income streams as if my home were a business waiting to be tapped. I smiled stiffly, but inside I felt something shift, like a small crack in an old window frame. This was my house, my history, yet I suddenly felt like a guest. Over the next few days, tiny intrusions accumulated. The sound of drawers opening without warning, the scrape of furniture being moved, Elena walking into my bedroom one afternoon without knocking, claiming she was checking for an outlet for her equipment. Daniel brushing it off when I mentioned it, saying, "She is just trying to help clean up, Mom." I'd never known help to feel so invasive. When Lydia stopped by with blueberry muffins, she paused in the doorway and whispered that the house felt different, and not in the way new curtains would explain. Her words nudged the unease I had been trying to smooth over. I told her everything was fine, but my voice betrayed me, thin and unsteady. She rested a hand on my arm and simply said, "Be careful with your keepsakes. Not everyone understands their meaning." One night, long after the children had gone to bed, I woke to the faint clatter of boxes being shifted in the garage. I stood in the hallway, listening. I recognized Daniel's low voice and Elena's whisper, the kind that carries intention more than secrecy. I wanted to go down and ask what they were doing, but a cold instinct held me still. For the first time since they arrived, I felt like I did not fully recognize my own family. The next morning, while putting away the breakfast dishes, I opened my tablet and saw something that made my heart stop. A listing on an online marketplace showed a familiar item blurred in the background, the edge of a wooden box that looked exactly like the one holding some of Thomas's film. I stared at it for a long moment, unable to breathe. It was small, insignificant in the eyes of anyone else, but to me it felt like the first stone in a landslide. As I wiped my hands on a dish towel, a chill slid down my spine. Something was happening inside my own home, something I no longer understood. The morning light felt colder, sharper, as if reflecting a truth I had tried not to see. The winds outside rattled the windows, sounding almost like a warning. If you're still here and feeling the tension building, Comment number 2 below to let me know you're following every detail. Now, let's continue to chapter 3, where the first cracks finally burst open. I woke before sunrise that morning, stirred by a heaviness in the air I could not name. The house had always been a place where mornings felt soft and predictable, but that day the silence pressed in on me like a weight. I moved through the kitchen with a slow, deliberate rhythm, making coffee and listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, trying to convince myself that the unease in my chest was only imagination. Still, something felt out of place, as though the house itself was holding its breath. After breakfast, I went to the entryway to sort the mail. A thick envelope from the regional housing and insurance office caught my attention. I tore it open, expecting the usual policy updates, but instead found a notice stating my homeowner's insurance had not been renewed due to non-payment. The words blurred for a moment. I knew I had paid for the full term 2 months earlier. I had the receipt neatly filed in my desk. I felt a cold ripple moving through me. Administrative mistakes happen, but not often, and never after I had already verified everything twice. I checked the drawer where I kept the receipts, and sure enough, the confirmation was there exactly where I placed it. I carried the notice into the living room, finding Daniel and Elena sorting something in the corner. When I asked if either of them had moved my mail or touched anything related to my accounts, Elena shrugged with a patronizing smile that made my stomach twist. She said, "Maybe you forgot," as though I had begun losing track of basic responsibilities. Daniel added, "Do not stress over little things." Their tones carried a blend of dismissal and impatience, as if my worry was an inconvenience. I walked away, but their responses sank in deeper than I admitted at the moment. Later, while dusting the shelves, I noticed the small vintage jewelry box that Thomas had bought for me in 1978 was missing. I searched every nearby surface, then widened my search to the adjoining rooms. It made no sense. I never moved that box. It had sat on the same shelf for decades, untouched except by me. As the minutes passed and the box remained missing, the knot in my chest tightened. Something was happening beneath the surface of this household arrangement, and it was slipping out of my control. A few hours later, while taking trash to the outside bins, I saw Elena sitting in the car, unaware that I was behind her. Her voice drifted through the cracked window, and I heard her mention contacting someone about pricing antique furniture. My breath caught. The realization hit me swiftly. The missing box may not be the only thing disappearing. It felt as though an invisible hand had just pulled back a curtain I had been too trusting to open. Driven by instinct, I stepped into the garage to check my stored belongings. Several boxes containing old photo albums and my husband's documents were disturbed. One box had been opened entirely, its contents rearranged by the hands that were not mine. Seeing the disarray of papers that represented a lifetime of memories and commitments felt like a violation so intimate it made my chest ache. When I returned inside, I found Elena in my bedroom with the top drawer pulled out. She froze when she noticed me. She mumbled, "I was checking the drawer rails," but her voice trembled slightly. I felt something break inside me, a quiet snap of realization. For the first time, I understood that my privacy was no longer being respected. I reminded her gently that my bedroom was personal space, but Daniel came to her defense, insisting I should trust them. Their combined indifference left me speechless. I withdrew to my room, feeling the walls closing in. The house that once sheltered me now felt altered, unsettled, no longer fully mine. As the day ended, a cold wind brushed the window pane, making it vibrate softly. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows stretching across the floor. This was only the beginning. The warning signs were everywhere, and I could no longer pretend not to see them. If you're still watching and sensing something darker underneath it all, comment number 3 below, so I know you're still with me. Now, let's step into chapter 4, where attempts to fix things only make everything. The morning after the unsettling discoveries, I woke with a sharp awareness pulsing behind my ribs, as if my own instincts were shaking me awake. The house felt heavier, as though every wall carried the imprint of unwelcome hands. I moved slowly through the hallway, touching the familiar frames and surfaces as if they could steady me. The events of the previous days replayed in fragments: the missing jewelry box, the disturbed documents, the whispered conversation about antique pricing. It was clear that pretending things were normal was no longer an option. I needed to reclaim what little control I still had. I spent the morning sitting at my desk, the soft scratch of paper against my fingers grounding me. I pulled every folder from the drawer, laying out insurance records, property deeds, tax papers, and bank receipts. I had always been meticulous with my documents, keeping everything in perfect order. Yet, several sheets were out of place, shoved into the wrong folders or turned upside down, as if someone had rifled through them quickly and carelessly. The violation tightened in my chest with a dull ache. My papers had always been my private world, a place where order and memory were preserved. Seeing them disturbed felt like someone had reached inside my mind and rearranged the pieces. I began sorting, reorganizing every page, sliding them into fresh protective sleeves, and making mental notes of which documents might be most desirable to someone looking for leverage. As I worked, Daniel wandered in, leaning against the door frame with an amused look that struck a nerve. He said a single line that hung in the air like an accusation. "It looks like you are building a lawyer's office in here." His tone was light, but it cut deeply, suggesting that my caution was nothing more than paranoia. Elena passed by behind him, offering a small, tight smile that felt more like mockery than reassurance. Their reactions reminded me how little they respected the boundaries I was trying to reinforce. I tried speaking calmly, telling them I wanted my personal space to remain personal, that my documents and belongings meant something to me. Elena dismissed my concern with a casual remark about outdated organization, and Daniel insisted I was overly sensitive. Their indifference stung more sharply than if they had denied everything outright. It made me feel invisible in my own home. Later in the afternoon, I decided I needed a safer place for my essentials. I retrieved a small brass lock and fastened it onto the wooden wardrobe where I kept the most valuable papers. As I tightened the latch, I noticed faint scratches around the original lock, a sign that someone had already tried to force their way in. My breath caught in my throat. The more I tried to protect myself, the more evidence I uncovered that confirmed my worst fears. While securing the wardrobe, I heard Elena's voice drifting from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone clipped and urgent. I heard her say, "If we cannot find the documents, the plan will take longer." The words rooted me to the floor. She was not talking about decor or storage. She was talking about something much more deliberate. It was no longer guesswork. Someone was searching for specific legal or financial papers. My hands trembled as I stepped away from the door, too shaken to confront her directly. When she noticed me a few moments later, she ended the call abruptly. I asked gently who she had been speaking with. She replied that it was a private matter and walked away without meeting my eyes. The doorway felt colder after she passed. I thought about calling Lydia, but the shame of admitting what was happening to my family silenced me. Instead, I wrote a brief note in my journal, reminding myself to stay alert. That evening, as I sat beside the window watching shadows stretch across the driveway, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. I froze, listening to each careful, deliberate step. I did not open my door. I simply sat still, absorbing the truth that had become impossible to deny. The danger was no longer creeping toward me. It was already inside the house. If you're still here and the weight of this story is gripping you, comment number 4 below to show you're following closely. Now, get ready for chapter 5, the moment everything explodes. Night settled over the house with a strange heaviness, the kind that sinks into floorboards and waits in the corners of rooms. I felt it the moment I turned off the last downstairs light. Even the air seemed to thicken, carrying a quiet warning I could not yet name. I moved through the dim hallway carefully, noticing how the shadows stretched unnaturally long across the carpet. Something inside me tightened with each step, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I tried to calm myself, telling my nerves they were overreacting, but the uneasiness only grew sharper. A little after 9, unable to sleep, I went downstairs for water. That was when I noticed the faint line of light spilling from the garage door. I knew I had closed it earlier. I remembered the satisfying click of the lock and the way I always checked twice out of habit. Seeing it open now sent a cold prickle along my spine. I pushed the door wider, and the garage greeted me with silence thicker than the night outside. Cardboard boxes were stacked along the walls, the same boxes that held decades of memories. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place, until I noticed one box leaning awkwardly with its lid half open. I stepped closer. Papers were scattered inside, shoved apart by impatient hands. Then I saw something worse. The folder containing documents related to the ownership of the house was missing from the corner where I had placed it a week earlier. My breath felt too small for my lungs. This was no accident. This was not cleaning. Someone had been digging with purpose, and they were growing bolder. Footsteps sounded behind me. When I turned, Daniel and Elena stood at the doorway, startled to see me there. Their faces froze for a split second, long enough for me to read the truth they did not speak. Daniel recovered first, trying to mask tension with a casual posture. Elena's eyes darted to the open box, then to me, as if measuring what I had seen. I asked why they were going through my things. Daniel brushed it off with a comment about helping organize, while Elena muttered something about younger people needing to take responsibility. Their words struck hard, not because of what they said, but because of the ease with which they said it. I felt the years of my life, my effort, my history being swept aside by their dismissive tones. For the first time, anger rose inside me like heat from a furnace. I told them plainly that my papers were not theirs to touch. My voice was steadier than I expected, firm in a way it had not been in years. Daniel bristled at the challenge and muttered that I was making things difficult, as if my desire to protect my own home was unreasonable. Elena folded her arms and added that I was too old-fashioned to keep up. Her expression held no empathy, just calculation. Then came the moment that shattered something inside me. Elena let slip that they had been searching for a specific authorization document, and Daniel, caught in the heat of the moment, blurted that someone younger needed to manage the property soon. The implication hit me like a blow. They were not only invading my space, they had a strategy, one that involved undermining my ability to make decisions at all. Elena's final insult, calling me stubborn and accusing me of blocking their future, cracked through the last of my restraint. I stared at them, seeing not my son and his wife, but two people who had already envisioned a life built on the ruins of mine. The pain was sharp and deep, but beneath it something else awakened, a resolve as cold as steel. I turned away without another word. I walked back into the house, climbed the stairs, and closed my bedroom door. In the reflection of the darkened window, I saw a woman who had been pushed past her limit. I knew then that there was no turning back. Whatever came next, I would not face it as the vulnerable woman they believed they could manipulate. I would face it as someone who finally understood the danger inside her own home. When I returned to my bedroom after the confrontation in the garage, a strange quiet had settled over the house. It was not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to cherish after long days. It was a heavy, suffocating stillness, the kind that makes every corner feel hostile. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the darkened window. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the shock of realizing just how far Daniel and Elena were willing to go. The echo of their words circled relentlessly in my mind, especially the line about someone younger needing to take over the house soon. It felt like an invisible blade pressed to my throat. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had held Daniel when he was little, the same hands that built this home with Thomas. Now they shook because of him. The betrayal lodged in my chest like a stone. For a long moment, I felt small and terribly alone, as though the life I had lived was slipping out of my grasp. But beneath that grief, something else stirred, a realization that if I did not act now, I would lose more than a house. I would lose my dignity, my independence, and the last part of myself that Thomas had trusted me to protect. I leaned back against the headboard and let my thoughts settle. In the silence, a memory surfaced. Thomas at the kitchen table, years before he passed, telling me that kindness should not become a weakness. He said it gently, with that calm certainty he always carried. Thinking of him steadied my breath. It occurred to me that this was the moment he had warned me about. I had spent so much of my life trying to be patient and forgiving, believing that love alone could fix anything. But love, without boundaries, was simply an invitation for someone to take and take until nothing remained. Two paths stretched out before me. One was the familiar path of silence, allowing Daniel and Elena to continue eroding my home and my autonomy piece by piece. The other was far harder, requiring a strength that felt rusty from disuse. It meant standing up for myself, even if that meant standing against my own son. Both choices hurt, but only one allowed me to keep what remained of my self-respect. Late that night, when I went to the kitchen for water, I heard Daniel and Elena murmuring in the living room. Their voices were low, but unmistakably tense. Elena spoke about accelerating their plan because I was growing suspicious. Daniel mentioned that if I resisted, they might need to convince others that I was becoming forgetful. The words struck me with chilling clarity. They were not just meddling, they were preparing to undermine my mental soundness if they needed to. Hearing that ended any hope I still held that this was a misunderstanding. I stood frozen in the hallway, absorbing every syllable. For the first time, the danger felt real and immediate. If they were willing to paint me as confused or unstable, then waiting or hoping for change was no longer an option. I walked quietly back to my room, each step carrying more resolve than the last. I opened my nightstand drawer and retrieved the old notebook where Thomas had kept important contacts. Near the back of the book, written in his careful handwriting, was the number for his trusted friend, the attorney Lawrence Grant. Seeing it sent a wave of emotion through me, but my decision did not waver. My hand shook only once before I pressed the number into my phone and saved it for the morning. I wrote a single line in my journal before turning off the light. Tonight, I choose my dignity. I gathered my important documents into a locked satchel and placed it beside the bed. It felt symbolic, as if I were gathering the pieces of myself that still mattered. As I lay down, I no longer felt defeated. Hurt, yes. Heartbroken, undeniably. But beneath everything was a quiet strength taking root. I whispered into the darkness that tomorrow I would fight back. And for the first time in weeks, I believed I could. If you're still watching and the turning point shook you, comment number 6 below to let me know you have not looked away. Now let's move into chapter 7, where consequences hit harder than expected. The morning after I made my decision felt unlike any other morning in that house. A cold stillness clung to every surface, as though the walls themselves remembered the confrontation from the night before and were cautious of what might come next. I rose slowly, my joints stiff, my breath uneven. The exhaustion was not only physical, it came from somewhere deeper, a place behind the ribs where fear and disappointment had collected like sediment. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, and faint lines etched themselves deeper across her forehead. It was astonishing how quickly stress could age a person. Downstairs, the atmosphere was stiff and brittle. Daniel moved through the kitchen without looking at me, his shoulders rigid, his steps clipped. Elena kept her distance, avoiding eye contact, as if acknowledgement alone could betray her. Their silence was not peaceful. It was strategic. It was the kind of quiet that settles before a storm rearranges the landscape. Every movement they made seemed measured, calculated, and I could sense the invisible boundary they had drawn, one that kept me on the outside of my own home. I noticed changes almost immediately. Certain drawers downstairs, ones they had previously left open and cluttered, were now locked. Elena walked past them with her chin raised slightly, giving the impression she was guarding something. Every time I passed the hallway closet, I felt her watchfulness shadow my steps. They were no longer hiding their anxiety. They were preparing for something. They believed I had seen more than I should have, and they were right. When I opened the locked wooden wardrobe in my room to check the documents I had gathered, my stomach dropped. Fresh scratch marks dug into the area around the latch, thin and sharp like the claws of desperation. Someone had tried to get inside during the night. The thought of their hands on my things while I slept a few feet away chilled me more than the morning air possibly could. The danger was no longer hypothetical. It was active, present, close enough to breathe the same air as me. I tried to maintain my composure. Moving through the house, I performed chores with an air of normalcy, wiping counters, watering plants, folding a few linens. But underneath the quiet routine, every part of me was alert. I knew better than to reveal the resolve forming in me. They could not suspect I was preparing to protect myself legally. I needed time, and time required silence. At one point, Daniel walked past me in the hallway. He did not speak or even slow his step. There was no trace of the son I remembered, the boy who once clung to my arm during thunderstorms, the man who used to kiss my cheek when he came home for holidays. His face was tight, closed off, hardened in a way that made my heart twist. Losing a piece of someone you love is one thing. Watching them willingly hand that piece away is another. Later that afternoon, while I was chopping vegetables for a simple soup, Elena appeared behind me so quietly I dropped the knife. She stood far too close, her gaze cold and appraising. It felt less like she was checking on dinner and more like she was taking inventory of me. A subtle chill crawled up my spine. I straightened slowly, forcing myself not to flinch. That evening, after they retreated to their room, I gathered my documents once more, placing them in a cloth tote I could easily hide beneath my coat. I set my alarm for dawn, knowing I would need to leave before they woke. I wrote one line in my journal: I must protect myself before it is too late. The words steadied me in a way nothing else had for weeks. When the house grew dark, I sat alone at the edge of my bed, the tote resting at my feet like a lifeline. The pain of what Daniel and Elena had become pressed against my chest, but beneath that pain was determination. I would not be erased. I would not be pushed out of the life I had built. The night stretched long and silent, and I stayed awake through most of it, waiting for morning to deliver the first step toward reclaiming the life they were trying to steal. The morning after everything fell apart arrived with a strange stillness, as if the house itself was waiting to see what I would do next. I woke before the sun rose, lying in the quiet that had been missing for months. The chaos from the night before still clung to the walls, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like the house belonged to me again. There was no trembling in my hands, no cold pressure in my chest, only a heavy exhaustion and an emerging clarity that felt almost unfamiliar. After weeks of fear, guilt, and confusion, I finally understood that the storm had passed its fiercest point, and now it was time to rebuild what remained of my life. I walked downstairs and saw a half-packed suitcase left open on the living room rug. Somewhere upstairs, I heard the dull thuds of Brooke shoving items into bags, followed by the distant, uneven steps of Daniel moving slowly, as if unsure whether he should apologize or keep pretending he had not crossed every line a son could cross. The tension hung thick in the air, but it no longer frightened me. I had already crossed the bridge they thought I would never dare step onto. Now, all that was left was to secure the ground beneath my feet. When the phone rang, I felt a ripple of nerves until I saw that it was Attorney Grant. His voice came through steady, reassuring, reminding me that the paperwork was in motion and that I had done everything exactly as instructed. He warned me gently that people like Daniel often tried to bargain or manipulate in the days following exposure. His words gave me a needed anchor. I thanked him and hung up, realizing that I finally had someone on my side who saw the situation for what it was, not what a mother's heart wished it to be. After the call, I decided to reclaim my home physically, one object at a time. I picked up the framed photographs that had been tossed aside, wiped off dust from the old mantel clock Robert had cherished, and placed the books back onto the living room shelf. Each movement felt like retrieving pieces of myself that had been quietly stripped away. My hands lingered on certain items longer than others, especially those connected to Robert, whose quiet strength I wished I could have borrowed sooner. As I moved toward the kitchen, a soft knock interrupted me. It was Helen from next door. Her eyes were full of concern as she handed me a plain envelope. Inside was a printed screenshot of text messages Brooke had accidentally sent to her granddaughter, boasting about their plan and celebrating how close they were to securing my house. It felt surreal to hold such blatant evidence, but it also brought a small surge of vindication. I thanked Helen, hugged her tightly, and felt the first real wave of relief since everything began. For the rest of the morning, I opened windows and let sunlight pour in, pushing away the stale heaviness that had filled the house. I cooked a small breakfast for myself and ate it slowly, savoring the quiet. Every action reminded me that recovery was not a dramatic leap, but a series of small, steady steps back towards self-respect. By midday, as I placed Robert's clock back above the fireplace, its ticking filled the room again. The sound anchored me, a reminder that time keeps moving forward, whether people stand with you or against you. I sat down, breathed in the warm light, and knew I was ready for what came next. If you're still here and feeling the shift toward resolution, comment number 8 below, so I know you're with me until the end. Now, let's head into the conclusion, where everything finds its place. The morning of the deadline arrived with a cool stillness that settled over the house like a final exhale. I woke before dawn, listening to the faint hum of the heating system and the distant rustle of the oak trees outside. For the first time in months, I felt the house breathing with me, instead of against me. There was no dread waiting for me at the bottom of the staircase, no anxiety twisting in my chest. The day had finally come, and there was no turning back for any of us. As the morning light crept across the hallway floor, I heard the muffled sounds coming from upstairs. Boxes shifting, closet doors opening and closing, the drag of suitcases against hardwood. Brooke stayed silent, moving with a stiff urgency that betrayed her embarrassment more clearly than words ever could. Daniel's steps were slower, heavier, as if each movement added another pound to the guilt already weighing on his shoulders. I did not go up to check on them. My presence was no longer needed to guide or comfort. This part of the journey belonged to them. A little later, the children appeared at the top of the staircase. Their eyes were wide, confused, and full of questions they were too frightened to ask. I placed a gentle hand on each of their shoulders, letting them feel the reassurance I still had for them. Love does not evaporate just because trust has been broken, and I wanted them to sense that. They lingered near me a moment longer before returning to their rooms to finish packing. By early afternoon, Daniel came down holding a plain envelope. His eyes were red, his face drawn. He handed it to me without saying anything at first. Inside were $3,000, the initial payment toward the $12,000 they owed. I nodded and placed it on the table beside me. He finally spoke, asking quietly if forgiveness was something I might consider one day. I told him the truth. I need time, and I need space. It was the only answer that did not betray myself. Brooke waited by the open door, clutching her bag. She did not look at me, and I did not expect her to. Truth has a way of stripping arrogance from people, leaving only the raw shape of who they really are. When the moving truck pulled out of the driveway, I did not follow it with my eyes. Instead, I stepped back into the house and closed the door softly behind me. The quiet that filled the space was not empty. It was peaceful. It was mine again. That evening, after the house finally fell silent again, I stood by the living room window and watched soft light spill across the yard. The air felt different, almost lighter, as if the house itself understood that a long, painful chapter had come to an end. The quiet did not feel empty. It felt earned. I walked slowly through each room, touching the familiar objects that had been pushed aside, reclaiming them the way I had reclaimed myself. The memories they carried no longer felt like weights holding me down. They felt like anchors reminding me of who I truly was before fear and manipulation clouded my judgment. I thought about everything that had happened: the deception, the betrayal, the bruising realization that love alone cannot hold a family together. Respect must stand beside it. Boundaries must protect it. And when those boundaries are violated, standing up for yourself is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. As the sun lowered behind the trees, I whispered a single thought into the quiet room. Peace is reclaimed. Not gifted, not granted. Reclaimed through courage I never knew I still had. And in that moment, I knew my life was mine again. In the quiet that follows any storm, there comes a moment when the heart finally understands what the struggle was really for. Not for victory, not for vindication, but for the simple right to breathe freely again. Sometimes life forces us to confront the painful truth that love without respect can become a quiet form of harm, and that peace is something we must actively reclaim, not passively wait for. Strength is rarely loud. Often it begins as a whisper inside us, reminding us that boundaries are not walls but doorways back to ourselves. And choosing to protect your dignity is not the end of compassion. It is the beginning of healing. Thank you so much for staying until the end of this journey. If this story moved you or made you reflect, I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to comment, follow, and subscribe so you never miss the next story.